Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Oh, we got 8 viewers already. Pretty cool. Hello, Aarons. Hello, Katniss. Hello, Christy. Good evening. Hope you guys are well. It is quarter after 10 on Saturday, July 26, 2025. We got 5 days left in the month. Smart Kulak, Houstonic.live. A little Massive Attack for the background tonight. I can turn the volume down over there. That's good. Harbor Freight Hat is online. And this is an interesting episode that we have tonight. Not necessarily content that you need to know. Not necessarily content that's gonna help you at your Trivial Pursuit or Jeopardy for that matter. But this 283 series of Houstonic.live, research, archival, analysis. This 283 series is so many topics related to the history of intramuscular injection using hypodermic syringes to inject medicine into muscles. Now, fortunately, I have a good coach, a real coach, and Jonathan Cooey, PhD, on this subject, which is why, even though I don't have an MD, I've never practiced medicine, I had to learn quite a bit because of the family's own exposure to drug addiction and chronic fatigue and so on. But my background as an analyst has allowed me to pick up on a lot of things pretty quickly, but I run them by other people before I just, pollute the air with nonsense. This is a series about intramuscular injection, and it was spawned by, well, first of all, Jonathan Cooey's ideas, but just trying to find the common denominator. Why is there this confusion about injuries happening because of injections or happening of vaccines in particular, most of which are intramuscularly injected, and sometimes they don't happen, and then there have been some vaccines applied different ways where you can make cases that they've been more effective. The whole area is a mess. And when you boil it down to this one thing, which sounds pretty benign, okay, so you use this tool versus that tool. This concept of injecting medicine into muscles, it's said to be one of the biggest innovations in medicine back at the time. And there was a tremendous amount of debate about how to do it, how effective it would be. One of the things that they argued about was a concept of localization. This is 140 years ago right now, almost 1.5 centuries, back in the year 1880. Localization. If someone has an injury, arm injury, should you inject the morphine near the injury, or can you inject it somewhere else in the body? I don't even know the answer myself right now. I know that when you go to have dental work done, they inject you close to they're going to be doing the work. So I think that there's something to it. But there was actually a lot of debate about that in the year 1880. And I'm sure that there's cases where localization of some types of medicine make a lot of sense and some where they don't. However, it highlights the state of the art, the state of the understanding of how all of this stuff is going to work back at the time that this technology, that this practice of intramuscular injection is being rolled out. One of the doctors that participated in this debate is shown here. Dr. Henry H. Kane, or H.H. Kane, K-A-N-E, last name. He was born in 1854. In the year 1880, actually in 1879, he was only 25 years old. He wrote a rather long and spirited book about intramuscular injection, and in particular, the intramuscular injection of morphine. It's probably been a long time since anyone in the world has actually looked at a picture of Henry H. Kane. I was able to dig it out of the newspapers.com archive. Sadly, there's no mention of him on Wikipedia. Now, I'm not saying that he's the most important person in the world, but boy, he did some interesting things. And there is some evidence to suggest that there might have actually been an engineered takedown of him throughout his life. It sounds like he made some mistakes as well, but his book, I think, about the huge tragedy of the intramuscular injection of morphine Probably rattled a lot of cages. He did practice medicine after that, but we'll go over some of those details. I think he wound up making a lot of a good fortune in addiction treatment of people who are dealing with addiction to morphine. That probably led to Henry H. Kane throughout the 1890s suddenly coming into a lot of money that he probably, most doctors wouldn't have made quite that much money. And then, the money gets to your head, and then, as would be the case back at the time, he went out. He started investing in race horses. He started throwing champagne parties. And then before you know it, there's a big takedown of him. Someone said that they tried to scam him out of this other person out of $10,000 for radium treatments. And it's wound up being front page New York Times. Front page New York Times. A year before he died, it was announced that he was scammed someone out of $10,000, which is probably at least $150,000, maybe $500,000 in today's money. I'm guessing, because you could get a home probably for $10,000 or less back at the time. Maybe not in Manhattan, but somewhere. So that was a lot of money. Either way, it was kind of a storied career. And the takedown of Henry H. Kane a year before, he was thrown into a sanitarium and then he died of tuberculosis, was actually Dr. Lederle. That's right, the very same doctor who, if you've studied the history of polio medicine, vaccines, SC40, it was that laboratory that is famed as being the source of the contamination of polio vaccines in the 1950s. So the founder of that whole business was a New York City health commissioner who, sure enough, was actually involved in the takedown of this guy. So where should we start here? Dr. Henry H. Kane, 1854. You can find his obituary here, died in 1906. Dr. Kane is dead after stormy career. Former head of Driving Club. Driving Club, by the way, in the year 1899, actually meant horse racing. Didn't mean, you get in your Model T and drive around. It still was not yet cars. That's how long ago the stupid idea came from, the dumb idea of injecting medicine intramuscularly. Dr. Henry H. Kane, who for years conducted a sanitarium in West 34th Street, Manhattan, and who was well known in Long Branch, died last Friday at Saranac Lake, New York, of tuberculosis, extending over a period of 20 years, during which time he accumulated several fortunes, owned famous racehorses, established a sumptuous home on the Upper West Side, was expelled from the County Medical Society, even went through bankruptcy, and attracted wide attention as president of the Road Drivers Association. Dr. Kane's career reached a sensational climax in January 1905 when he was arrested on the charge of defrauding John W. McCullum of Mount Vernon of $10,000 by means of alleged radium treatment. Pleading guilty to the charge in March of the same year, he was sentenced to spend 4 months in the penitentiary. It was said by detectives who had been investigating complaints against Dr. Kane's sanitarium, number 136 West 34th Street, that Kane had made a fortune through his fraudulent treatment. He made a specialty of treating men, and his patients numbered hundreds every week. When he was arrested, his wife put up the $11,500 cash bail for his release. McCullum alleged that he was drugged and induced to buy what was described as a dinostat, for which he paid $10,000. Taking up road driving in 1899, Dr. Kane purchased William E., who was a famous trotter, and they give the name of a whole bunch of different horses here. He was at the zenith of his good fortune between the years 1899, 1900, and 1903, to the surprise of those whom he had dazzled with his displays of wealth. He went through bankruptcy with liabilities of $13,000, etc. Interesting that they make no mention of his medical career, other than the fact that to suggest that he defrauded people. And maybe he did. But, that winds up. As a matter of fact, the obituary doesn't even make mention if he had kids or not. This is almost a modern day slander. So we learned about him as we showed yesterday, where it was, the hypodermic injection of morphia, its history, advantages and dangers by Dr. H. Kane. This was written in 1880. The introduction, as I showed you yesterday, was pretty dynamite. And this was written in 1880. A physician of the present day without a hypodermic syringe in his pocket or close at hand would be looked upon as would have been a physician 50 years ago did he not own or use a lancet. There is no proceeding in medicine that has become so rapidly popular, no method of allaying pain so prompt in its action and permanent in its effect, no plan of medication that has been so carelessly used and thoroughly abused, and no therapeutic discovery that has been so great a blessing and so great a curse to mankind as the hypodermic injection of morphia. Now, noteworthy that he's not actually calling out the hypodermic injection of any medicine. He's really specific to morphine here. However, though, if the use of morphine and the use of hypodermic syringes to inject morphine intramuscularly is such a big and sensational topic, it highlights how easy the on-ramp was to using intramuscular injection, using hypodermic syringes to administer vaccines. There is a article, and I did make this H. Kane page just within the last couple of hours here. This is a 1980 guide from the Virginia Medical Monthly. And in here, some very interesting discussion. Again, this is a 1880 guide, I believe, on page 155. It covers a lot of topics, but this winds up being an important topic. The question of whether a hypodermic syringe should be locally given for the relief of pain, or whether the same good effect is produced by an injection at some distant point on the body, is one on which doctors disagree exceedingly. Alex Wood, Eulenberg, Behier, that's Behir, Mitchell, Keene, Morehouse, and Chope, that's Chouppe, I could be mispronouncing all of these, and others believe fully in the doctrine of localization, while Anstey, De Ranzi, Charles Hunter, Lawton, Burton, Ruppaner, that's Ruppaner, who wrote a very important book in 1880 about intramuscular injection using a hypodermic syringe. Bartholow and Kane, that's H. Kane, the guy who I've been introduced. And I believe the great majority of the profession adhere to the opposite view. Interesting. So many people actually don't believe in localization at this time. Many of the latter, however, qualify their assertion by making some few exceptions in cases of neuralgia where any of the larger nerve trunks are subject to morbid action. In such cases, it is the almost universal practice to deliver the injection as near as precise to the seat of pain as possible. That may be dental work. I don't know. I'm guessing there. It goes on to say, I do not know if the idea is entirely original with me, but I am inclined to the belief that the sudden relief from pain experienced when a hypodermic injection of morphia is made directly over or near the painful point of neuralgia is often due to the liquid vehicle of the injection instead of the salk or alkaloid dissolved therein. Is it not possible that the water infiltrated into the cellular tissue and even into the histological elements themselves may produce a nerve impression which benumbs the pain for a limited time? Of course, this sedation can only endure while the hydration continues, but before the histological elements or ultimate nerve cells have recovered from the shock of hydration, the morphia has entered the general circulation and the analgesia is taken up and carried in on a different manner by another agent. Another point of difference between experimenters is as to whether morphia injected into one portion of the body is taken up into the general circulation and any more rapidly than when introduced into another. I mean, of course, when a local effect is not desired. Some, like Bartholomew, are, quote, unable to observe any difference in the rapidity of the effect as influenced by the site of puncture, unquote, while others agree in the main with Dr. H. Kane, who found, quote, absorption from the groin and inner area of arm to rank first in point of rapidity. Forearm next, leg next, abdomen next, and then the thick tissues of the back last, unquote. I found this one part interesting here, and I'm sure the rest is still incredibly interesting, where they actually talk about the fluid that is included with it. Is it just water, or is it going to be some other type of liquid? And this concept of uptake, of how fast does the medicine work, whether it is injected with water, is it injected pure, is it injected with a salt water, or is it injected perhaps even with oil? So they were mixing up whatever was being injected with other stuff, believing that the other stuff would impact the uptake, how fast it would be uptaken. Now, this other stuff may in turn also have had an impact on the overall body's response to what was being injected. Who knows? Maybe in some cases it was even more severe, the additives, the oils perhaps, than what was the injection actually contained. Anyways, that was a big part of the discussion as well, regarding intramuscular injection, regarding the polio the outbreak of polio, etc. We demonstrated in some earlier episodes in this series, the 283 series, that there was this vaccine that was developed right around the year 1916, 1917, right before the 1918 big Spanish flu. You know, the one that they say killed 50 million or 100 million people. They don't even know, even though the newspapers at the time said 6 million tops. Somehow or another, someone missed 45 million to 95 million corpses. I don't know. I mean, that they were really off by the count significantly, I guess. Either way, they developed, or a vaccine was developed at that time, came out of the United States military. If you want to hate the U.S. military, you're free to do it at this juncture, I guess. Something called a lipo vaccine, which was actually a vaccine intramuscularly injected. It was for, I don't know if it was typhoid or cholera, and it would, instead of having to do several shots, it would actually take all of the shots of a series and put it in one injection, one big injection, and they mixed it with oil, believing that the oil, the substrate, would actually slow down the absorption. So instead of, having to go for one shot once a week, effectively it would leach out, I guess, of the injection site at a rate similar to that. So it would be a lot easier to inject. So the additives were also a big part of the discussion. The concept of localization applied to other things as well. This is in my vaccines injected historical information. April 30th, 1881. So only a year after this other guide that we're reading right now, where they're talking about localization. This was in the Hamilton Spectator about diphtheria. And this is basically scientific highlights, okay? So newspapers would have these sections where they would give you like the who's who, or like headlines of big scientific news around the world. And this April 30th, 1881, 145 years ago, titled Diphtheria. And it says, in the special case of diphtheria, the question arises, does the germ remain fixed upon the mucous membrane with which it first comes in contact? Or is there a general effect upon the body and then the local result? This question is a pertinent one. For the disease of glanders, an instance has occurred in which a horse was inoculated with the nasal mucus by hypodermic injection, and still the symptoms come out in the nose. The symptoms. So there was a horse that was sick. They found a horse that was sick in 1880 with glanders, a sick horse. And the illness was apparent because of the mucus. The mucus, maybe the mucus was discolored, I don't know. So they took the mucus, okay, and they injected it intramuscularly into another horse. And the other horse had similar symptoms. Well, the other horse got sick. Well, golly gee, color me surprised. Now, they said similar symptoms. Well, when you're sick, you have a little temperature, you're under the weather, runny nose. I mean, that could happen for a lot of different reasons. When you got a general illness, your body's going to do general things. And it doesn't mean you have a very specific type of, specially folded antigen protein or something or other. You're sick. You're under the weather. The horse was sick. So what this meant was, if they wanted to create a vaccine for this glanders for horses, there was no reason to administer the vaccine in the nasal passages, I guess, where the infection usually would show up. Instead, they could just inject the horse in the ass or in the leg, anywhere, and the immunity will be provided. This stupid story, I think, has been reused so many times. Why do we inject people in the arm to protect them against a lung infection? Where's the rationale behind that? Oh, because we learned from our mentors. Well, where did they come up with the idea? Well, they learned from their mentors. Where did they get the idea? And so on and so forth, until eventually you have one guy who took horse mucus from a sick horse, injected it into the ass of another horse, and the other horse got sick. That's why. That's how dumb the underlying idea is of injecting people in their muscles, in their forearms or in their legs to protect them against COVID in the lungs. That's how stupid. This is where the dumb idea comes from. 1880, 1881. And as I'm showing in these other documents, they're still trying to figure out, where could you administer the pain medicine? How local does it need to be? What are the benefits? That is, they don't even know how it's circulating around the body. That is how primitive their understanding was of bodies, living animals, humans, that they were injecting stuff into. And a legacy was created which people kept following. Someone had a misguided idea, a bad idea, a misunderstanding of repeatable results. You keep injecting the horses. Well, guess what? The horses keep getting sick. I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was satanic. I don't think it was a cult. I don't think it was about depopulation. It was just a bad idea. But before you know it, you have other people learning from this. And no one wants to be the person to raise up in their hand and go, where did this idea come from? They're going to be kicked out of the room. They're going to be kicked out of the lecture. They're not going to get their MD. Sorry, it's over. Now, when it comes to Dr. Kane, while it is wonderful that he wrote this brave book against morphine injections, at the same time, he didn't totally question the nature of intramuscular injection entirely. He went kind of soft on it. Although the fact that he's highlighting the intramuscular injection in and of itself as part of one of the components of the biggest mistakes ever shows that some doctors were starting. They knew something was going on. Okay, they made some progress, but eventually they stumbled. And maybe they stumbled because it just kept on happening. Kane probably realized that other doctors said, we got to cut back on the morphine. And then I don't. Kane was hardly. I don't see any evidence that he was a naturopath or an anti-vaccine person. But at least he was capable of seeing, wow, this is a game changer. This using hypodermic syringes to intramuscularly inject morphine. This is a game changer. We need to reconsider this. But I don't think he quite understand the bigger picture. I actually found on the American history, there's some interesting things. He actually wound up selling various lotions, potions. So he might have actually been a little bit of a con artist. This is Kane's Buchu, B-U-C-H-U, medicine. I don't know if this was to help people against addiction. A lot of therapies were being sold in the late 1800s and 1880s and 1890s to help people with dealing with the drink, dealing with alcoholism, drinking addiction. So there were different syrups that were being made available. There were also syrups that were made to help people kick the habit of morphine. I don't know how effective they were. There was no FDA. Who knows? Maybe they just contained opium themselves. They barely had to say on the label what was in them. They didn't even have to show that they worked. All they needed was a good advertising campaign. So I'm sure that he knew that there was a lot of money to be made in helping people, kick the morphine habit. And I think because he, so early in his career, had already written a book, he probably invested in addiction treatments, addiction recovery centers, etc. in the 1800s, 1890s, and started making a ton of money. It's too bad, but I think that really was the path of his career. But I do think that there was an organized takedown of him. This is a book that was written in 2010. It's called The English Opium Eater. It's written by Robert Morrison, and it is a biography of Thomas de Quincey, D-E space Q-U-I-N-C-E-Y. And I'll read the headline of the book, okay? Author of the famed and scandalous Confessions of an English Opium Eater, Thomas de Quincey, born 1785, died in 1859, has long lacked a full-fledged biography. His friendships with leading poets and men of letters in the Romantic and Victorian periods, including William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Thomas Carlyle, have long placed him at the center of the 19th century literary studies. He was a man who engaged with nearly every facet of literary culture, including the roles played by publishers, booksellers, and journalists in literary production, dissemination, and evaluation. His writing was a tremendous influence on Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, and William Burroughs. De Quincey is a fascinating and topical figure for other reasons, too. A self-mythologizing autobiographer whose attitudes to drug-induced creativity and addiction strike highly resonant chords for contemporary readership. Robert Morrison's biography passionately argues for the critical importance and enduring value of this neglected icon of English literature. This is Thomas de Quincey. I'm not familiar with Thomas de Quincey. What's noteworthy, though, is he was known for eating opium. He ate opium, which probably gave him highs, probably, induced certain states and freedoms, etc., and led to perhaps his creativity. But he didn't live that long. I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually died from consuming so much opium. But the difference was that he ate the opium. And I think one of the difference, which was picked up on by others, including the Dr. Kane, was that the United States transitioned into using hypodermic syringes to inject opium in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s. And it was causing a horrible epidemic, as I reviewed in my show yesterday. As you can see, the highest rate of deaths per 100,000 from drug overdoses after the year 2000, by the way. Every year since the year 2000 has been another record. But before the year 2000, you'd have to go all the way back to the year 1900, the time of the first opium epidemic in the United States, where people were just discovering how wonderful it was to inject. You get all the opium. You get a lot more of it if you inject it into a muscle using a hypodermic syringe. Anyways, De Quincey, I don't know if it was his estate or not, but it actually wound up funding some opium treatment centers in Manhattan. So you can actually find at least back in the year 1880, De Quincey centers in Manhattan. And sure enough, our Dr. Kane that I started off talking about worked at some of those centers. Probably, I haven't verified this yet, but I speculate that it probably came from the estate or something like that of De Quincey himself, the English opium eater, at least as it was called by the title of this book that came out 15 years ago in 2010, written by Robert Morrison. I don't know if it's worth reading or not, but it shows that other people are thinking about this stuff as well. 12 ratings, not exactly, selling lots of them if you only got 12 ratings, but at least it's out there. What else here? Oh, yeah. The last thing I'm going to just review, and then I have another long day tomorrow, is this New York Times. So this is a New York Times front page 1905. Front page New York Times is big news. You don't make the front page of New York Times unless it's a big story. And here, sure enough, the first story, Radium cures swindle, charged to physicians. Dr. H.H. Kane, the guy who wrote the book of this warning people about morphine and the hypodermic syringe. Former horseman and 2 others in tombs paid $10,000, victim says. And it goes on to read. I think the text is actually easier to read than that. 2 physicians and a clerk were arrested at 136 West 34th Street yesterday afternoon. This began 1905. January 1905, charged with engineering a radium cure swindle, which Champ S. Andrews, attorney for the County Medical Society, says netted them $10,000 from one victim alone. What's that, about $1 million in today's money? The prisoners are Dr. Henry H. Kane, 51 years old at the time, of West 34th Street, formerly a well-known horseman. Again, they don't like to say that he was a doctor. They keep dodging that. He was more than just a horseman. It's like if Jay Leno died. He was a car enthusiast. Jay Leno, the car enthusiast. Well, yeah, he definitely is a car enthusiast, but he also was a comedian, and he had a nighttime show watched by millions of people every day for like 20-something years. And he was a car enthusiast. I don't know, just me. But anyways, it goes on to say the arrests were made at Kane's place by Mr. Andrews, Detective Sergeants O'Connell and Price of the District Attorney's Office. Indictments have been returned against the prisoners. Let's see here. Going on. The complaint in the case is John McCallum, a carpenter. A carpenter? Where does he get this kind of money? Right there is fishy. 21 North Street, Mount Vernon. He says the physicians got his $10,000, all he had, in $100, $1,000, $1,500, and $2,000 lots, for which they gave him vials of alleged radium, which they said would cure his kidney trouble. Before the exposure came McCallum. Before the exposure came McCallum had saved a quart of the stuff. Sounds like that's a character scan that didn't work right. Mr. Andrews, who I guess is the attorney, said, in November of 1903, McCallum lost his wife. He was left with one child, a boy of 10 years of age. Thinking that he would protect this boy in the event of his own death, he applied for life insurance. He was told that the medical examination developed a slight tendency toward Bright's disease, which is a kidney disease. This frightened the man very much, and the agent of the company suggested that he call Dr. Kane, who he described as a celebrated specialist. Well, they knew he was a specialist, but everyone else is just calling him a horse rider. A day or two afterwards, McCallum received through the mail several circulars setting forth Kane's skill as a doctor. McCallum called on Dr. Kane and was shortly afterward operated upon. He paid $100 for this. He was then put under so-called treatment for which he paid by the month. And it goes into the details about how eventually they got someone to play a rich woman to go in there and say that she would back up this guy's account if he didn't have enough money. It's kind of complicated and awkward. But it's noting here that one of the people that helped set him up, this Dr. Kane, Dr. Ernest Lederle, and Dr. Joseph Jeghue, that's Jeghue, conducted a series of exhaustive experiments and showed that there was not the slightest trace of the precious drug radium in what was given to this carpenter. But as a matter of fact, only the ingredients were gentian, iron, and a few simple drugs ordinarily used in a tonic preparation. It's noteworthy that Ernest Lederle, at the New York City Health Commissioner at the time, he's the one who bought the farm, Pearl River, New York, that evolved into Lederle Laboratories, now part of Pfizer. And that is, antibiotics came out of there, but most notably, as far as the in the world of vaccine skepticism goes, a contaminated batch of the Salk polio vaccine also came out of there. Just a little interesting tidbit of information. It goes to show that this scientist, this doctor who wrote this book on morphine addiction, was not a nobody. He wound up being on the New York Times front page multiple times, actually. He wound up probably making millions, and he was mentioned in medical journals around the country, as you can see by this other one in Virginia. He was part of this whole debate about localization. This is important backstory to know that this is not just some random, fraudulent 1880 document that some idiot wrote and no one read because it wasn't important. This guy was important. He was on the New York Times front page multiple times. That means he was a somebody. So therefore, it doesn't mean that this book is right, but it does mean that it should be respected as influential. And it's been referenced a lot. The only time that it doesn't get referenced is today. Of course, Brett Weinstein and others they don't know about any of this stuff. Nah, they'll never talk about any of these things. All right, let me look at some comments here. Boy, is my neck stiff. Snake oil salesman? Could be a snake oil salesman, Christy. Hard to tell. I don't think he started off as one. But money does something to some people. When they get a taste of real money, they want more of it. Some people are happy. If you can get on top of things, you can pay down the mortgage, care for the kids, have a car. Maybe, some people, they reach a point where it's like, this is good, this is enough. Other people, you get a little bit more. You want a little bit more, and you think people like you because you got more money, so you want more money. And I think he was probably a little flexible as he got older, which is too bad. It's also possible, though, that his earlier in life questioning of injections, as time went on, some people may not have liked that. I don't know. So I'm open to the possibility that he could have been set up a little bit. The history of AMA, American Medical Association, is that what that's in reference to? Oh, Lake Lady. Hello, Lake Lady. Lake Lady is our friend Marie. She went out recently to see a good friend of hers. Long-time friend, as I understand it, 50-plus years. Unfortunately, this woman, I believe her name is Cheryl, Sherill, who is now in hospice and getting ready to move on. Marie went out to spend some time with her, which just goes to show what type of a person Marie is, to make a trip like that, an endeavor like that, at her own expense. So our prayers for having Marie as a friend, of course, and for Marie's friend Cheryl and her family in these times. I mentioned this on a couple of live streams recently. I encourage people when they are trying to assess what the hell happened here. How did we go from smallpox vaccines, as they were in the year 1850, to there being, 60, 70 shots in the childhood vaccine schedule, most of which are intramuscular injection. Even the word shot is actually a derogatory phrase that was stolen from morphine injections. That is what it was called. That was the vulgar word. Newspaper articles at the time would say that using a hypodermic syringe to intramuscularly inject someone with a vaccine, it was vulgar to refer to it as a shot, because shot was the slang for receiving a morphine injection. So they were trying to get away with that, but here we are. They were still calling them shots. That stuck. I encourage people to not always seek bad intentions. Don't try to explain everything as bad people doing bad things and evil. A lot of bad things have happened because people made bad decisions, and that combined with people's egos, with people's inability to admit mistakes, with the momentum of, I do it this way because I learned to do it this way from my mentor, and this is how I'm going to teach my students, and so on. You can always later on default to go, you know what, after keeping an open mind for such a long period of time, it really does seem as though this person did this other thing because they were just a bad person. You can always defer to that later on, okay? However, though, the moment we assume that somebody does something because they're evil, you stop researching. Research ends at that moment when we just assume motive. When the motive is just assumed evil, people don't research anymore. That is one of the biggest mistakes I see so many other channels making. How did this president get killed? CIA, evil. That's it. You don't have to look anymore. Evil, CIA. But you want to ask more questions. No more questions. Evil. Of course, there's people who are evil, but you can always determine that motive later on. I think that a lot of bad ideas, a lot of mistakes are protected, are not really understood, such as intramuscular injection, for example, because we just default to it's evil instead of look at all this evidence that we've been going over, and there's still so much more. It's out there. It's freely available. Well, not all free. You have to pay for subscriptions in some cases. There are actually tens of thousands of people on the internet doing searches right now trying to understand what led to this massive vaccine catastrophe. And you know what most of them think? Bill Gates is evil. Fauci is evil. And that's it. That's the end. Evil. That's it. You don't have to learn anymore. They're evil. It's also why I've used the phrase before, Epstein is where research goes to die. Because Epstein is evil. That's it. He does evil things. Why did bad things happen? Epstein is evil. That's it. If you can't explain something, just find the connection to Epstein, and Epstein is evil. That's it. You don't have to research anymore. Then you can just be mad. It's a little bit different, but everything just being associated with that, it just creates, research dies. And matter of fact, that might be one of the reasons of several why the whole Epstein thing upsets me so much. It kills research. It ends research. The moment the word comes up, I know that there's no more learning to be done. That's it. I've never seen anyone start to research Epstein and then continue to learn anything valuable after that. It just, that's it. It's over. So even if him and his, mate, whoever she was, Maxwell, are important, simply by trying to not touch that subject until as late as possible, improve someone's ability to research so dramatically that I encourage people to just ignore it, just steer around it. Some of it's because the metadata mess, and the other part is because it's just evil. So, yeah, the American Medical Association is out there, and yeah, there's doctors protecting their businesses, and they're protecting their bottom lines, and, they want to avoid the liability, and they want to, they want to use people for the purposes of medical experimentation without payments. All this stuff is true. They all sort of justify it. And yeah, their rationalization is made possible because of egos, because of selfishness, because of godlessness, perhaps, and so on and so forth. But there's such a richer understanding of what the hell's going on, and maybe even ways to be able to have more dialogue and make suggestions on where we go from here by just not leading with evil. So, anyways, I would just encourage to avoid it as much as possible until you really do reach the end of the road, until you really get to the end of the river, as they say in Apocalypse Now. This is the end of the river, all right. This is definitely where the evil's happening. All right, guys. I'm going to scoot. A weird show, I know. Love you guys much. I have another lot of stuff going on tomorrow. My dad is responding to some commands right now, which is amazing. I didn't think that would ever happen again. So I'll see him again tomorrow. And if it's going to be a long recovery, at best, it's going to be a long recovery. But that is something. I think he has some grandparenting left to do. He has some, and he has some years left to do. But so wish him the best, and it's good to have you here, Marie. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the program. Mark Kulak, Houstonic.live, Patreon, PayPal, all support is appreciated. P.O. Box 505, Southborough, Massachusetts 01772. Right to Houstonic or Mark Kulak, whatever the case. Take care. Be safe. Think positively. Avoid that blaming everything on evil motive.